Hello, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to just show you a very simple embossing trick. I'm using the Imala stamp, Strut Your Stuff, and I'm going to pick the central lady there, using some white embossing powder, some sticky ink, and then I'm using a distress ink. This is a mini cube, picked raspberry, this one. Okay, so I'm going to use some watercolour card first off because I want the ink to be able to move on the paper. So I've placed my stamp, I've lined it up so I know where it's supposed to be. So I'm going to ink over the stamp using the picked raspberry. Now this is just one of the mini cubes. It doesn't matter if you've got the big one, the small one, absolutely fine. So I'm making sure I've got a really good coverage because I want to get plenty of ink down onto the watercolour card. And give it a good push down. There we go, all done. So now I'm going to take some water and I'm just going to put a fine mist over the top just until that ink starts to move. Now being watercolour card, it will bend with the water. So I'm keeping one hand off it, just watching as it's starting to move. And I'm using here one of the drink stirrers to hold the paper down so that it doesn't pool the water. Wait for it to move as much as I like. Then I'm gently going to tilt it to the side, so just to give the water a little bit of an extra push so I can see more of that ink running from the image. Now when you've got it to where you'd like it, try and keep it down flat, and then I'm going to use a heat gun just to dry it off, but make sure you don't push the water with the ink around too much unless that's the result you're aiming for. Making sure the image is completely dry before we move on to the next step. I've speeded this up so you're not sat watching me use a heat gun, fall asleep. Okay, so that's all dry now. So next off, I'm going to pop that back into my stamping platform, making sure I use the magnets to keep the card down. It's a little bit curly where it's had the water and then I've dried it with the heat gun. Okay, so that's all pushed down. So now I'm going to pop over the top of this my embossing powder, just to make sure I'm not going to get any loose particles sticking where I don't really want them to be. So always try and get into a habit of using the anti-static bag. It really does pay off. So I'm just taking the sticky ink. This is the perfect medium, the Ranger one, but you can use any brand, of course you can. Make sure it's got a good coverage again on the stamp. Push it down, making sure that can really make good contact with the paper. So I'm going to transfer that ink over to my image. And I'm going to give it another go as well, just to make sure, in case I've missed anything on the first, because obviously you can't really see it, so unless you're using one that's got a colour in it. Making sure that goes down. And then what we're going to do, once this is all covered as much as we're happy with, I'm going to remove it from the stamping platform, and then we're going to take the white embossing powder. I'm just going to take a piece of paper just to catch that embossing powder once it's on there. I'm just using the Wow. You can use any white embossing powder, whichever one you prefer to use. Covering the image, bring in some paper and then just shake off the excess powder. Tap that off, otherwise you'll use your heat gun and it will just blow. You can heat from underneath, it's entirely up to you, which I tend to use the underneath drying technique when I'm using a really heavy embossing powder, usually the thick one. Right, I'm going to speed this up as well, just so you're not sat watching. Mind you, it is a bit more interesting rather than watching paint dry using the embossing powder. Okay, so that's pretty good. Quite happy with where that is. So now I need to put a sentiment on there. Just something quite simple, because we've got a lot of colour going on, and I want to make it quite an impactful statement. And I thought I'd turn this card maybe into a New Year's card. So I want something that is quite poignant for this time of year. So I'm going to use This Is Your Story, as I love that. Also, it's pretty good sentiment to use on the front of a journal, or a diary, or a planner for the new year. Pop that down, and then I'm going to take the Nocturne black versifying Clair ink, and cover that. I will ink it again. I always tend to do it twice, just so I get a nice sharp image where it's nice and even, so I'm not applying little in one area and more in another. But usually using the stamping platform, you're pretty good to go. And obviously it's so much easier, isn't it? You just lift your lid back down. There we go. This is your story. I'm pretty happy with that. I'm going to use some pink matte and layering onto the card. Very simple, nice and easy. You can use any stamps. There we go. Thank you so much for watching.